Hello and welcome this Friday the 13th in the glorious month of October and our countdown to Halloween. Today I bring you The Juniper Tree, which was first published by the Brothers Grimm in the year 1812 in the first edition of Children's and Household Tales. As such, because it was in the first one and not intended for children, this one is one of the most dark fairy tales they ever put to paper. And it's quite unique because it's one of the ones they didn't revise for the next ones. So, children, come to be traumatised. Because this story involves themes of biblical symbolism, child abuse, murder, cannibalism, and a host of other really dark, really bothersome attributes. This one has a long history, so if you want to skip straight to the story, click at this time right up here. And if not, stay with me for a very quick history lesson. Now, as with most of the early fairy tales, there are a lot of other fairy tales which take bits from the original ones. And the Juniper Tree is one of the original ones. So for example, the Rose Tree was published in the year 1890 by Joseph Jacobs, and that is the English version of the Juniper Tree entitled The Rose Tree. And also we have the Norwegian tale called Buttercup, but I couldn't find anything else on that yet. Now, I've said that the Juniper Tree is one of the original fairy tales, and it is, but it isn't the original tale of the Juniper Tree. For the Brothers Grimm are thought to have been inspired by renowned painter Philippe Otto Runge. I might have said that wrong, I might have butchered it, but we'll go with it. And his original was titled The Almond Tree, and it was a poem published in the year 1808. So 4 years before the Children's and Household Tales was first published. And the Grimm brothers wrote themselves in the appendix of the first Children's and Household Tales in 1812 that the text for the Juniper Tree was supplied by Philippe. Now, like most of the Grimm fairy tales, there has been many adaptations of the Juniper Tree over the years, but for some unknown reason, Disney never touched it. Could it be the cannibalism and murder? The House of Mouse is far too hesitant. It has been made into an opera in 1985, a radio play for BBC Three, an Icelandic film in 1990 starring Björk, and more recently a French film in 2003. Now, the central element, the Juniper Tree itself, has a rich history in folklore traditions. Its oil, ashes, berries and bark are used in many cultures across the globe for its many healing properties. But the tree's berries were also used in earlier years as a form of contraceptive and to induce abortion. In Russian versions of the tale, the tree is not a juniper, it's a birch tree, and of course in the English one it is a rose tree instead of a juniper one. Now, while the Juniper Tree has lurid descriptions of both cannibalism and decapitation, that did not stop author P.L. Travers, author of the wonderful children's tale of Mary Poppins, describing the whole fairy tale as simply beautiful. And in his essay on fairy stories, none other than J.R.R. Tolkien, renowned author of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, cited the Juniper Tree as an example of the evils of censorship for children. Many versions in his day omitted the stew and omitted the more graphic elements. And Tolkien believed that children should not be spared any word of it unless they were going to be spared the whole fairy tale in its entirety. And because I agree with him, I'm not going to spare you one bit of the detail either. Because I know that you're all a bunch of shady degenerates, and I know you want to hear about bad people, cannibalism, and murder most foul.
This is gonna be good.
So, with that introduction, let's jump right in. Now, this is one of the very, very few fairy tales that actually begins with a date. And it begins with a date some 2,000 years prior, so which puts it setting around biblical times. There lived a rich man and his wife who was both beautiful and good. Now, they loved each other very, very much, but they had no children. And every night they prayed and prayed that they would be granted a child. In front of the house there was a garden, and in the garden there grew a juniper tree. Once in the winter-time the wife was peeling an apple under the tree, and while she was peeling it she cut her finger. Blood dripped on the snow. "Oh," said the woman, and she sighed deeply. "If only I had a child as red as blood and as white as snow." After she had spoken those words she was happy, for she had a feeling that something would come of it, and she went back into the house. A month went by and the snow melted. 2 months passed and everything had become green. 3 months went by and flowers were sprouting from the ground. 4 months passed and all the trees in the woods were growing tall, with their green branches intertwining. The woods echoed with the song of birds, and blossoms were dropping from the trees, and so the 5th month went by. And when the woman sat under the juniper tree, her heart leaped for joy, because the tree was so fragrant. She fell to her knees and was beside herself with happiness. When the 6th month had passed, the fruit grew large and firm, and she became very quiet. In the 7th month she picked the berries from the juniper tree, and gorged herself on them until she became miserable and was ailing. Now remember, people used to use the berries from the juniper tree as a form of contraception, or abortion. After the 8th month went by, she called her husband and, in tears, said to him, "If I die, bury me under the juniper tree." After that she felt better and was calm until the 9th month had passed. Then she bore a child as white as snow and as red as blood. When she saw the child, she felt so happy that she died of joy. Really? We'll move on. Now her loving husband adhered to her wishes and buried her underneath the juniper tree as she had requested. But time passed and he no longer wept every day for his poor dead wife. And in time, he took a second one. Soon his second wife fell pregnant, and she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Now when she looked at her daughter, she felt nothing but love. But when she looked at her husband's son, she felt sick at heart. It seemed that no matter what the boy did, he was always in the way. And the woman kept wondering how she could get rid of him, because in the event of her husband's death, his son would inherit everything, and her daughter would be left with nothing. And she was quickly concocting a plan in which she could get rid of the boy and her daughter would inherit the lot. Now quite quickly she began to hate this little boy. She slapped him, punched him, cuffed him round the head. Any chance she got, any time he was in the vicinity, she just gave him a smack. The poor child lived in terror, and every day when he came home from school he knew no peace. And you've got to really feel for the little lad. I mean, he's lost his mother at birth. He's never known her, and the only mother figure he's known is this horrible human being that just slaps him around everywhere. Now one day the woman was followed into the pantry by her daughter, who asked for an apple. She gave her the most perfect apple from the large wooden chest, which had a big heavy lid and a sharp iron lock on it. Now the woman was irritated when her daughter asked if her brother could have one as well, but she said he could have one when he returned home from school. Now she looked out the window and saw the boy walking down the lane towards the house, and it seemed at that moment as if the devil had entered her. Which is never a bloody excuse for being an abusive, horrible parent. She snatched the apple from her daughter's hand and threw it back inside the chest, saying that her daughter couldn't have one until her brother had had his first. Now the little boy walked through the door, and the woman whispered to him very sweetly that would he like an apple? Her voice might have been sweet, but her face was filled with hate. Now the boy was scared, but he didn't want to pass up the opportunity of his mother being nice to him, and said that he would love one. And she felt compelled to coax him, and said to him, "Go into that chest and pick out any apple you want." And as the little boy leaned over the chest, the devil prompted her, and crash! She slammed the lid so hard that the iron lock severed his neck, and his head flew off and fell amongst the apples. Then she was struck by fear and thought, how am I going to get out of this? By not doing it in the first place. She went up to her room and straight to her dresser, where she took out a white kerchief from a drawer. She put the boy's head back on his neck and tied the neckerchief around it so nothing could be seen. Then she set him on a chair in front of the door and put the apple in his hand. Some time later, little Marlene, which is the daughter, came into the kitchen and went up to her mother, who was standing by the fire in front of a pot of hot water which she was constantly stirring. Mother, said Marlene, brother's sitting by the door and looks very pale. He's got an apple in his hand, and I asked him to give me the apple, but he didn't answer, and I became very scared. Go back to him, said the mother, and if he doesn't answer you, give him a clout on the ear. Little Marlene returned to him and said, Brother, give me the apple. But he wouldn't respond. So she gave him a clout on the ear, and his head fell off. The little girl was so frightened that she began to cry and howl. Then she ran to her mother and said, Oh, mother, I've knocked my brother's head off. And she wept and couldn't be comforted. Marlene, said the mother, what have you done? You're not to open your mouth about this. We don't want anyone to know, and besides, there's nothing we can do about it now. You've killed him, so we'll make a stew out of him. The mother took the little boy's body and chopped him into pieces. Next, she put them all into a pot and let them stew. But Marlene stood nearby and wept until all her tears fell into the pot, so that it didn't need any salt. When the father came home, he sat down at the table and asked where his son was. The mother brought the big dish of stew and sat it in the middle of the kitchen table, and told him that his son had gone off to visit relatives. Now at this the father was sad that the boy hadn't even stopped to say goodbye before going to visit unknown relatives anywhere in the world, but he left it at that. I wouldn't really put him up for Father of the Year either, although to be fair he didn't kill him. He began eating his dinner and he asked his daughter why she was still crying, and she shouldn't really cry because her brother would be back from visiting soon enough. Now in the middle of eating he exclaimed that this stew was the best he had ever tasted, the best she had ever done, and he wanted a second helping. But the more the father ate, the more he wanted. And he declared that no one else was to have any stew and that it was made just for him, and he felt that he should eat it all. He kept eating until the stew pot was empty, and he threw the bones from the meat underneath the kitchen table, completely discarded. Now little Marlene continued to weep, and she took out her silk handkerchief and she crawled under the kitchen table, gathered all the bones under there and wrapped them softly in her silk handkerchief. She carefully carried them outside and stood beneath the juniper tree, and she fell to her knees and buried them underneath the tree, all the while weeping silently. Now when she was done, she felt a little bit better and she stopped crying. Now the juniper tree began to move. The branches separated and came together again, as though they were clapping their hands in joy. At the same time, smoke came out of the tree, and in the middle of the smoke there was a flame that seemed to be humming. Then a beautiful bird flew out of the fire and began singing magnificently. He soared high into the air, and after he vanished, the juniper tree was as it was before, yet the silk handkerchief was gone. Marlene was very happy and gay. It was as if her brother was still alive, and she went merrily back into the house, sat down at the table, and ate. Meanwhile, the bird flew away, landed on the roof of a goldsmith's house, and began to sing. My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My sister Marlene, she made sure to see. My bones were gathered secretly, bound nicely in silk as neat as can be, and laid beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a lovely bird I am. Now a goldsmith was sitting in his shop underneath this roof, and he was in the middle of making a beautiful gold chain, and at hearing the lovely voice of the bird on the roof, he put down his tools and went outside. He was in that much of a hurry to get outside that when he was crossing the threshold, he lost his slippers. Now the sun was shining brightly, and he saw, to his amazement, the most beautiful bird he had ever seen, perched on his roof. And he called up to the bird that could he sing the song again, because he had missed most of it. Now the bird refused, and said that he never sings a second song for nothing, but he would sing it if the goldsmith gave him the gold chain that was in his hand. The goldsmith nodded, and the bird flew down, perched in front of him, took the gold chain around his neck, and sang it again. My mother, she killed me, my father, he ate me, my sister Marlene, she made sure to see, my bones were gathered secretly, bound nicely in silk, as neat as can be, and laid beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a lovely bird I am. Then the bird took off and flew off to the shoemaker's house, sat on his roof, and sang the song again. Now when the shoemaker ran outside so that he could hear the bird better, he called to his wife, children, apprentices, and servants that they were to put down whatever they were doing, follow him outside to witness this beautiful bird and his beautiful song. Now the bird had red and green feathers, and around its neck was a chain of pure gold which shone in the sun, and his eyes sparkled like diamonds. Now the shoemaker asked if the bird would sing the song again, because most of them had missed it. But the bird refused, and said that he didn't sing a second song for nothing. The shoemaker would have to give him something for it. So the shoemaker sent his wife to get the best pair of red shoes that were hiding up in the attic, and he offered them to the bird. The bird swooped down from the roof and picked up the red shoes, and began the song again. My mother, she killed me, my father, he ate me, my sister Marlene, she made sure to see, my bones were gathered secretly, bound nicely in silk, as neat as can be, and laid beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a lovely bird I am. Now when the bird had finished, it flew off, and it flew to a faraway mill. Inside the mill sat 20 of the miller's men hewing a very large stone. They were making a right racket, but the bird perched on the linden tree outside and began his song, and by the time he was finished, all the men from the mill were stood outside listening to him. Now one of the men, who was the last out and caught only the very, very last bit, asked the bird if he would sing the song again. But the bird refused, of course, and said that I won't sing a second time for nothing. But if they gave the bird the millstone they had been hewing, then he would sing for them again. Now the men said yes. The bird flew down from the tree, perched in front of them, and it took all 20 men to lift this millstone, and the bird put his head through the hole in the middle like a collar, and flew up with it to the linden tree, where he began the song one more time. My mother, she killed me, my father, he ate me, my sister Marlene, she made sure to see, my bones were gathered secretly, bound nicely in silk, as neat as can be, and laid beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a lovely bird I am. Now when the bird was done, it spread its glorious wings. In one claw was the golden chain, in the other claw was the pair of red shoes, and around its neck was the hefty millstone. And with these things the bird flew back to its father's house, and perched himself upon the roof. Now the father, mother, and little Marlene were all sat around the kitchen table. And the father exclaimed how happy he felt that day, and how his heart felt so light. The mother, meanwhile, said that she felt frightened, as if there was a big storm on its way. Little Marlene just sat there, weeping silently. The bird hopped nearer to the kitchen roof. The father exclaimed how happy he was feeling, and how he noticed today how the sun shone so brightly, how beautiful nature was, and he felt as if he was going to see an old friend. Now the woman said that she felt so scared that her teeth were chattering, and she felt as if she had fire running through her veins. And she began to tear at her clothing, to scratch at her skin, to free her veins from this molten lava that she felt was flowing through them. And little Marlene was continuously weeping so much that she had soaked her apron with all the tears that she was shedding. Now after listening to all this, the bird flew from the roof and went and landed in the juniper tree in the garden, where it began to sing. My mother, she killed me. The mother stopped her ears, shut her eyes, and tried not to see or hear anything, but there was a roaring in her ears like a turbulent storm, and her eyes burned and flashed like lightning. My father, he ate me. "Oh, wife," said the man, "listen to that beautiful bird singing so gloriously. The sun's so warm, and it smells like cinnamon." My sister Marlene made sure to see. Then Marlene laid her head on her knees and wept, but the man said, "I'm going outside. I must see the bird close up." "Oh, don't go," cried the wife. "I feel as if the whole house was shaking and about to go up in flames." Nevertheless, the man went out and looked at the bird. My bones were gathered secretly, bound nicely in silk as neat as can be, and laid beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a lovely bird I am. After ending his song, the bird dropped the golden chain, and it fell around the man's neck just right, so that it fit him perfectly. Then he went inside and said, "Look how lovely that bird is. He gave me this beautiful golden chain, and he's just as beautiful as well." But the woman was petrified and fell to the floor. Her cap slipped off her head, and the bird sang again. My mother, she killed me. Oh, I wish I were 1,000 feet beneath the earth so I wouldn't have to hear this. My father, he ate me. Then the woman fell down again as if she were dead. My sister Marlene, she made sure to see. "Oh," said Marlene, "I want to go outside too, and see if the bird will give me something." Then she went out. My bones were gathered secretly, bound nicely in silk as neat as can be, and all at once the bird threw her the red shoes, and laid them beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a lovely bird I am. Marlene felt cheerful and happy. She put on the new red shoes and danced and skipped back into the house. "Oh," she said, "I was so sad when I went out, and now I feel so cheerful. That certainly is a splendid bird. He gave me a pair of red shoes as a gift." "Not me," said the wife, who jumped and her hair flared up like red-hot flames. "I feel as if the world were coming to an end. Maybe I'd feel better if I went outside." And as she went outside the door, crash! The bird threw the millstone down on her head and crushed her to death. The father and Marlene heard the crash and went outside. Smoke, flames and fire were rising from the spot, and when it was over, the little brother was standing there. He took his father and Marlene by the hand, and all three were very happy. And then they went into the house, sat down at the table, and finished their dinner. And that is the ending of the tale of the juniper tree. Now, as you can tell, it is one of the darker fairy tales, but sometimes the darker ones are all the more satisfying at the end. Wouldn't you agree? So if you like this video, please leave me a like, leave me a comment, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts. What do you think of this, one of the darker tales of the Grimm franchise? And perfect for our Friday the 13th of October video. And let me know which are some of the really dark fairy tales that you know. If I haven't covered them already, give me a comment down below and I shall make sure that they go on the list. The darker the fairy tale, the better in my opinion. So, as always, keep your spooky selves reading.